All right, so we are going to code the final exam from fall 2023 in lab. So this is the exam format. First question, you're going to be asked to acknowledge the rules of the test like you always do in all the tests. And then there are, in this case, 3 questions. The first thing to notice is that the 3 questions are not evenly weighted. Question 1 has 30 points, the other 2 have 35. So make sure you take a quick look at the points on the test because it could be that some of the questions are heavier than others. I would recommend doing the ones that you know the best first, and then work your way to the ones that you know the least at the end. All right. So question A says, if you wish to use Replit for the test, click here. Write a student class with the following fields: a string field name, quizzes, test 1, test 2, final test, all of type double. Student has a method called getFinalGrade, which takes in no parameters and returns a double. The method returns the mean average of all of the student double fields, i.e. it adds quizzes, test 1, test 2, and final test, and divides by 4. The result is returned. All right, so I'm just going to code that part, and then we'll continue on. There's obviously a lot more down below. So starting off, I need to make a student class. So student.java. And inside here, I'm going to have class student. And it looks like I'm supposed to, I'm just going to flip this out so that I can alt tab back and forth quickly. All right, so I need a string field name. So string name. I need quizzes, test 1, test 2, and final test, all of type double. Quizzes, and then, ooh, I don't have shortcuts. That's really annoying. All right, test 1. And you, of course, could put these all on one line, but either way, final test. All right, write a method called getFinalGrade. So that one's going to be public. All of the previous ones that I declared should have been declared private. If I'm in C#, that would have implicitly happened, but here in Java, I should make sure that I'm being specific. I missed my shortcuts. All right, so my public method is supposed to take no parameters and return a double, and it is called getFinalGrade. All right, and so we are supposed to return the mean average of all the students' double fields, i.e. quizzes, test 1, test 2, and final, and divide the result by 4. So I'm simply going to say double answer is equal to quizzes plus test 1 plus test 2 plus final test divide by 4. And then I'm going to return answer. Yes, you could do that in one statement. Yes, you could do it in 3 statements by adding them together. All of the above should be fine. All right, next up it says, write a section class with the following fields: an array list or list of students called roster. All right, so that's going to be another file. All right, so the first thing you're going to ask yourself when you're doing this is, should these all be separate files or should I just do it all in one file? It will work either way, but you should generally make them all separate files. So you'll end up turning in a bunch of different files here. By naming them or by having them all separate, it does allow you to check that they are correct, that you wrote all of them at the end. All right, so this is supposed to be called section, so class section. All right, and it's supposed to have an array list of students called roster. So array list, and then in parentheses, student roster equals new array list of student. And yes, you can omit that second student if you really want to. In order for this to work, I have to import Java util array list. All right, and if you're in C#, then you would do collections and do list. All right, section has the following methods. A method called addStudent, which takes in a student as a parameter and returns nothing. This student is added to the roster. All right. I missed my shortcuts. Okay. All right, so we have public. All right, so it's called addStudent, takes in a student, returns nothing. So public void addStudent, and it takes in a student as a parameter. So we'll say student, new student, and then it simply adds them to the roster. So that's going to be roster.add, lowercase a for Java, capital A if you're in C#, new student. And there we go. All right, well, that one's pretty easy. Next up, we have a method called getSectionAverage. Takes in no parameters and returns a double. This method returns the mean average of all the students' final grades. That is, it traverses roster, adding up all the students' get final grades, and then divides the sum by the number of students in roster. This result is then returned. Okay, so there's a couple of problems here. I can't just get the grade for each person. I actually have to call the method from the previous class. So I'm going to have to call get final grade a bunch, and I'm going to need some kind of a loop that iterates over this collection. You'll notice that the previous class has nothing that tells me um, um, anything about the individual student other than the ability to get their final grade. So we really just have to iterate over the array list or the list that we have and call that method on each one. All right, so this is going to be another public. This one returns a double. Oh, it returns public void. No, wait, it does. It returns a double. Read the wrong thing. Get section average and takes in no parameters. All right, so method returns the mean average of all the students' final grades. So we have to go through each one of them. So I'm going to use a for each loop. You certainly could do this either way. So I'm going to say for each student X in roster. That's going to give me a variable called X that one at a time will have each of the students in it. All right, and I'm supposed to call get final grade on each one and add them up. So in order to add them up, I'm going to need a sum. And since I'm doing an average, I'm also going to need a count. So I'm going to start off by creating a double sum and an int count. The sum has to be a double because I'm using doubles for everything. The count can just be an integer because I'm just counting how many times I did stuff. All right, so we're going to say sum plus equals x dot get final grade. That's how I get the grade from one person, and then count plus plus so that I can keep track of how many of them that I've seen. So that will give me a sum and a count. It's yelling at me because I never initialized either of those. So we're going to set that equal to 0 and set that equal to 0. All right, and then at the end, I should be able to return sum divided by count. Now, there could possibly be problems there. I could have 0 students in the roster, in which case I'm going to get a divide by 0 error. So if you wanted to be careful with all of that, you would probably need an if statement around all of this. To be fair, the code set or the instructions say nothing about dealing with that. So there's no points associated with dealing with it. But obviously there could be a problem where you could divide by 0 here. So since it doesn't say anything, I'm not going to bother coding it, but that is a mistake. It probably should be coded. All right. In your driver, create a section object and prompt the user for a file name. Open the file, read each line, create a student with the information on each line, and call add student. In the section object you created, the structure of the file will be as follows: name, quiz 1, quiz 2, quiz 3, quiz 4, test 1, test 2, final. And so an example might look like this. Okay, so we're giving you an example of what the file might look like. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and make myself a file in Replit so that I have it. We'll call this grades.txt. And I'm just going to paste that in. This will allow me to test. You certainly don't have to do this. This isn't part of the question, but it would be nice to be able to test when you're done. And I'm moving that so that it's out here where it can actually get to it. Okay, great. So in my main, I'm supposed to do a couple of things. So I'm supposed to make create a section object. So section, we'll call it my section equals new section. All right, and prompt the user for a file name. So enter a file name. Still don't have shortcuts. Got it. All right. And then I'm going to read in a file name. So scanner, my scan equals new scanner. And this one's going to be on system.in because I'm reading from standard input. All right, so in order for that to work, I need a scanner. So import java util scanner. All right, so that gives me a scanner. I don't know why I still have this hello world. Let me get rid of that. All right, so then I'm supposed to take that as the file name, open the file, read each line, and create a student object with each one. All right, so in order to open that as a file name, I'm going to need a file object. So file, my file equals new file. And the name of the file is going to be what they told me. So I never actually read in their answer. I just created the scanner object. So let me actually read in their answer. My scan.next line is going to give me their file name, and I'm going to store that in a string called file name. All right, so when I open the file, I'm going to do that with file name. I'm going to be consistent with my capitalization so it actually works. All right. In order for the file to work, I need to import java.io. Just import java.io star. All right. Now I need a scanner. So this scanner is for reading the actual file, not for reading the input from the user. So I'll call it my file scanner equals new scanner. And this one is going to be on my file, not on system.in. And then I need the usual block of code in order to read out a file. So I'm going to say while my file scanner has next line. So I'm going to read in one line. So string, I'll call it line because I'm very creative, equals my file scanner dot next line. All right, so remember you have to do both of those things. You need to have the while I have a next line, actually read in the next line. The most common thing people forget to do is to actually read the line out of the file with the next line. So without that, you won't actually get anything. All right, and so then I'm supposed to create a student object and I'm supposed to do a bunch of stuff. I feel like at this point I would like to test because I've written a lot of code and I haven't done anything to check that any of it is working. And I can see that Replic's being weird and underlining things here. So that's giving me some pause that I've made some kind of mistake. So what I'm going to do right now, this is not part of what it's asking me to do, but it's a good way to test that you're doing something right, is I'm just going to print out the line from the file and I'm going to go ahead and compile and run this code. And then I'm going to give it the name of my file, which is called grade.txt, and I'm going to make sure that it actually does output all of the data. All right, so the first problem it has is that this is not catching exceptions, and Java requires you to catch exceptions for the file IO. Okay, so that's probably why it was upset. So we're going to come in here, going to click somewhere that it'll allow me to click, and we're going to do try around all of this. So I'm just going to pull that out and put it at the bottom under here. And then I'm going to highlight all this and just indent it so that it's actually inside of the try block. All right, and then I need a catch. I'll just catch exception because it's not very clear about what I need to do, and I'm just going to print out error, and I'll give us e.message, get message, just so that I can see what the problem is if there actually is a problem. All right, let's try running this again. Clear that off. Okay, great. It's asking for a file name. I'm going to say grade.txt, and it looks like it can read the file. So, okay, I'm in good shape at this point. Again, don't code the entire thing and then try to figure out what mistake you made an hour ago. Test as you go. Write a little bit, test, write a little bit, test. The fact that this compiled tells me that there's no syntax errors in student or section either, because all of those would have been compiled as well just by virtue of being in here. All right, so now that we've opened the file, we read in a line, create a student with the information on each line and call add student on the section. So I have to create a student. All right, so the first problem that I've realized here is I don't really have a way to create a student. I created this class and it has a bunch of private attributes, but there's no way for me to actually create a student. There's no way for me to fill those attributes. So I either need a bunch of setters or I need a constructor or I need both. There's nothing in the instructions that say you need it, but it's physically impossible to create a student without it at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and add in a couple of constructors here. So the one constructor, there we go. So we're going to do, come on. We're going to do a constructor called student, which is going to take in all of these things. So let's take a look at what's coming in from the file. So I'm getting a quiz 1, a quiz 2, a quiz 3, and a quiz 4, but the student just has a quizzes. So obviously I'm going to have to calculate an average on that. So my constructor is either going to take in all the quizzes separately and then I do the math here, or I'm going to assume that you do that before you call the constructor. So for this one, I'm going to assume you do it before you call the constructor, and this is just going to take in a string, new name, a double, I'll call it Q for quizzes, a double T1 and a double T2 and a double final test. I'm never going to remember those acronyms. Great. Curly braces, and then I'm just going to set all the things. So name equals new name, quizzes equals Q, test 1 equals T1, semicolon, test 2 equals T2, semicolon, and final test equals FT, is that what we called it? With a capital T for good measure. All right, great. So now I have a constructor that actually allows me to make a student. And I need that in order to make a student over in main. So what I'm supposed to do is after I read this out of the file, I'm supposed to make a student. So in general, what I'm going to do here, instead of printing out what I got from the file, I'm going to say student, new student equals new student, which is great, but I've got to figure out what to put in those parentheses. So the file gave me this format, and what I need in the end is a name, which that's the first field, an average of these together, and then test 1, test 2, and final exam. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of work on the line that I got from the file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that line, I'm going to break it up using the split method to separate it into its bits, and then I'm going to do a little bit of math to get to where I'm supposed to be. All right, so the line is called line. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an array of strings. I'll call it bits, which is equal to the line dot split on comma. That's going to break the line up into separate little parts. So now bits at position 0 is going to be the name, and bits at position 1 is going to be their quiz 1, and so on and so forth. All right, so I certainly can just keep track of all of that, and I could pass those as the parameters into the constructor, but I'm just going to be a little bit more explicit here just so that we can remember what everything is. So string name, I'll call it n, is equal to bits 0, because that's the student's name. All right, so that's the first thing that I'm supposed to pass over here. So that one's great. The second thing that I get in is problematic because I've got to get all of the quizzes and average them together. So I've double Q1 would be the first quiz, and that's going to be in bits at position 1. And then I have a Q2, a Q3, and a Q4. So I'm just going to do a little bit of math here directly, and I'm going to say quiz average is equal to bits at position 1 plus bits at position 2 plus bits at position 3 plus bits at position 4. Those are the 4 quizzes divided by 4. And then I'm going to put a parenthesis around that because I definitely need to do the adding first and then get the answer back at the end. And all that can get stored in quiz average. Now, there are issues there where I could certainly have problems, such as it could be the case that I don't have enough values in there and they don't come in correctly. The other problem that I have is all of these are currently strings because this is an array of strings. And you can see that it's unhappy when I tried to add them together because they are strings. So I actually have to convert each of those into a double before I will be able to do this. All right, so we're going to go back to the previous idea. So we're going to say double Q1 is equal to, and then to convert something into a double, I do double.parse double, which is like integer.parseInt, and then it was bits at position 1. Okay, let's do this for all of them. Quiz 2 is double, I missed my shortcuts. Parse double, bits at position 2, and 3 of these, well actually 4. Now, if this was actually the final, you would probably be starting to freak yourself out thinking, this is taking a really long time. This is only question 1. Suppress those thoughts in your head. They are irrelevant thoughts. Yes, it's good to keep track of the time, but at the same time, there's no point in freaking yourself out. Just get through it. You'll be okay. All right, so we have Q1 plus Q2 plus Q3 plus Q4, and now it's happy with that because those are all doubles, and I'm dividing that by 4. All right, so that's the second parameter I'm going to send in, quiz average. All right, and then after that, I'm supposed to send in the test 1, the test 2, and the final, and all of those are also strings, so I've got to convert each of them to strings as well. Yep, question. Say that again. 20, okay, the question is lines 22 to 25, could you do them in one step? Yes, you could. Well, if you go to 26, yes, you could. Instead of Q1 here, I could literally write double dot parse double parentheses bits at position 1, and then do that for each one of the four in the sum. But either way, I would have to type out this separately for each one of them. It's just where I'm putting them in separate lines or in the sum. Good question. All right, so we'll call this one D1, or sorry, T1, that's test one. And it also is going to be a double dot parse double on bits at position 5 at this point. That should be the next field. And T2, bits at position 6. And finally, what is it called? Final test. It's at position 7. Okay, great. So we're going to put in all of these in here. So we have T1, T2, and final test. And that looks like a valid call to the constructor. So I'm happy with T1. No, it just took a moment to get there. Okay, so that's how I make a student. Whew, that was a lot. But this does show that you understand how to read something out of a file and break it up. This is a pretty common thing that you might have to do. The double parse doubles are annoying, but they're fairly easy. All right, so now that I've put that in there, I will notice that at the bottom here, it says that you can assume that the file will only contain valid entries. So part of the back of your head should have been saying, well, what happens if there's one too few or one too many? The code's going to crash, and it will, but the question says you can ignore that for the purpose of this question. So yay. All right, so after we made a student object, create a student with the information on each line, and then call add student on the section object. So my section is called my section, if I remember correctly. There it is, my section. So I'm going to do my section dot add student, because that's the name of the method for adding a student in section. Add student, and it takes in a student, which is, of course, a new student. Okay, great. What next? It's worth noting that the student's quiz field is calculated by added all the individual and divide by 4. In the above example, the first student would have the following information: Alice's grade, blah, blah, blah. Okay, call these section objects get section average and print the result. You do not need to worry about rounding errors. Okay, so that should be fairly easy. I just need to call the method get, what is it called? Get section average. There we go. And that should give me the average. That returns, I believe, get section average returns a double. So I'll store that in a double, and then I'll just print that out. And then a print statement at the bottom here. Averages plus the average. Great. All right, so quick scan of the question to make sure I didn't miss anything. Looks reasonable to me. I'm going to go ahead and run it again. Clear the console over here just to make sure it looks reasonable. And I'm still printing out each of the lines. That print statement will have to go at the end, but right now it's fine so I can see it. Doopy doopy doop. Okay, my file name is grade.txt, and it says the average is an 82.76, and down here 82.76. So I can be relatively confident my output is correct because I got the same thing as the example. All right, so at this point, all of those need to be submitted in Gradescope. So I have to get main, section, and student. You'd probably want to rename main to be question a.java or .cs, whatever it is, and then those three are ready to submit. All right, so a couple of things to notice in here. So what did this question cover? It covered file I/O. I had to be able to read in text from a file. I had to be able to parse it with a a split method in a string, which was something that we looked at. I had to do some basic math. I also had to do array lists or lists, and I had to do some other just general math kind of stuff for each loops and stuff like that as well. So there's a lot of stuff covered in this question. Yep. Okay, so the question is, if I forgot to take out this line that does, the print of each of the individual lines, would I lose points? The answer is no, you will not lose points for that. You can put in as many debug statements as you want, and we will just ignore them when we're reading through it. The only thing we're grading you on is, did you do the things we're asking you to do? All right, and then the other thoughts here along this lines are, if you get halfway into this question and you do not remember how to read a file, it's just gone out of your head, write all the rest of it, because you're getting points for all the bits that you do. So even if you can't remember how to read in the file, just put in a comment that says, open the file, I don't remember how to do that, and then put in the while loop and parse it as if you had read out the file. We don't care that your code works. We are never going to run your code in an IDE. It is simply read by a human being to see if what you did solves the problem. If you wrote all of the code and it works, wonderful. If you wrote all the code and there's a few syntax errors, you will still get 100 as long as we can understand and you're close in. Like if you misspell scanner or you forget a semicolon somewhere, you're not going to lose points for that. You're getting points for doing each of the parts. So make sure you do all the parts you can do, even if there's bits that you're just baffled by or you can't remember how to do. All right, so that was question one. Any other questions on question one before I zip on to question two? All right, so the next question. Write a static method, stackMath, which takes in a string and returns an integer. The input string will be made up of digits. You can assume that the input will only ever contain digits. Create a stack of integers. As an example, you can create a stack of doubles as follows. And then we give you a little bit of code for creating a stack. Traverse the input string from left to right, casting each character into an integer and push them into the stack. Once all characters have been pushed into the stack, do the following. Pop an integer from the stack. If it's empty, return that integer. Otherwise, pop another element from the stack, do an operation on them, and push the result back into the stack. The operation must be done in this order: addition, subtraction, etc. Keep track of if a sentinel is even or odd, will easily help you alternate between the operations. So if it's called with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, the operations would be this bucket of crazy, which I don't understand. That's fine. We'll deal with it in a minute. All right, so back up to the top. We're going to create a static method. Don't worry too much about the details of what it is that we're trying to do. Just start coding what it's telling you to do if you can remember how to make a new replet. There we go. All right. So the first thing I'm supposed to do is create a static method, stackMath, which takes in a string and returns an integer. Okay, that's doable. All right, so new method. Hey, I have shortcuts. Public static returns an integer. So int, it's called stackMath, and it takes in a string. All right, so that's what the first line told me to do. Now, what now? All right, so the input string will be made up of digits. You can assume that the input will only ever contain digits. Create a stack of integers inside of the method. As an example, this is how you do it. Okay, so notably what they're asking me to do here, but we're just gonna do it. And I don't have shortcuts anymore. Cool. All right, so I need to import, it says, Java util stack. And then I'm supposed to create a stack down here, and that's done with, according to the code they gave me, stack double s equals new stack double. Okay, great. So I did what they told me. So create a stack of integers. Done. Traverse the input string from left to right, casting each character into an integer and pushing them into the stack. Okay, so I'm getting some big long string like this. And what I'm supposed to do is I'm supposed to break it up into the individual characters and then convert them into doubles and push them into the stack. Okay, so the input string is called input because that's what I called it. So I'm supposed to take that input and I'm supposed to break it up. Anybody remember how to break up a string into a bunch of characters? So I need a character array, and I'm going to call it char array. And I'm going to do input dot, and then I'm going to sit here because I can't remember how to do it, and I'm going to look at the list of options in here. And what I'm going to find in this list of options is toChar array. What happened here? Input dot, all right, toChar array. This will convert a string to a character array. So I end up with a character array. This basically takes the big string and breaks it up into the individual characters. Great, so now I have an array of characters where each character is an individual number. All right, cast each character into an integer and push them into the stack. Once all characters have been pushed into the stack, do the following. All right, so I'm supposed to do a loop where I go through each one of the characters in that array. I have an array of characters, so I can use a for or a for each loop here. I'll use a for loop. So for car x in the character array, and what I'm supposed to do is convert each one to an int. So integer dot parseInt of x. X is that character. And then I'm supposed to push them into the stack. So my stack is called S, and I need some way of adding them into the stack. So we're going to use .add, and what we're adding in is next num. Okay, so that would be my first guess as to how to do this. But I'm actually going to have a couple of problems here. When I try to use parseInt, it says the method in parseInt string on this input is not applicable for the argument's character. So I can't just convert a character into an integer this way because it is not working because it's expecting me to pass in a string. So any thoughts? Any thoughts from anyone in the audience? So I need to get this into a character. It's currently a string. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to use the string method to pull out the first character out of the string. Remember car at? So that will pull out one character out of the string and give it to me. Wait, it's not a string. That's the whole problem. It's a character. What am I doing here? Traverse the input, blah, 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 blah. Once all the characters have been pushed into the stack, casting each character into an integer. No one has thoughts? Okay, so this is a classic example of you're doing the test, you're running out of time, and you're not remembering how to do something. I know that basically this has to get converted into an integer, and so I'm going to try just casting it to an integer. I actually don't think that's going to work correctly, but it'll probably give me most of the points. What was your comment? Yeah, but it's a string that it's expecting, and right now I have a character. So it kicked back parsint. So again, the detail of whether that's correct or not is irrelevant. It will not work if it's wrong, but at the end of the day, no one's ever going to run the code. So this is a good guess as to converting a character. I think this will give me the wrong answer, but here we are. All right. So push them into the stack, and this is having a problem with add. The method add in the type double is not applicable for the arguments. Okay, so it's unhappy with this being an integer, which is odd because it told me to make a stack, create a stack of integers. Okay, so I misread that. So this is supposed to be integer. I just copied the example without actually thinking about it. All right, great. I haven't looked at this question in a long time, in case that's not clear. All right, so great. Pop, once all the characters have been pushed into the stack, do the following. So we're going to assume that pushed everything into the stack. All right, pop an integer from the stack. If the stack is empty, return that integer. Otherwise, pop another element from the stack, do an operation on them, and push the result back onto the stack. Okay, so pop an integer from the stack. So again, we're going to type A or S, which is the name of my stack, and we're going to look in here to see if we have a pop, because it's asking me to pop something. We do, great. So s.pop seems to pop something from the stack, and hopefully that gives me back an integer. I'll call it num1, because I don't know what else to call it. All right, so pop an integer from the stack. If the stack is empty, return that integer. All right, if s dot, all right, now we need to look for something that checks to see if it's empty. Hey, there we go. If s.empty, then I'm supposed to return that number. All right, great. Otherwise, so that looks like an else, pop another element from the stack and do an operation on it. The result will be pushed back into the stack. Okay, so I'm supposed to pop another number from the stack, so I'm going to do int num2 equals s.pop. That gives me another number, and then I'm supposed to do an operation. The operation is supposed to be addition, then subtraction, then addition, then subtraction. So I'm going to have to keep track of what the last thing I did was. Did I do an add or did I do a subtract? So it gives you a hint down here that says you might want to use a Boolean for this. Keep track of if a sentinel is even or odd will help you alternate between the operations. So you could either use a Boolean or you could use an integer, something that's counting or switching back and forth to tell you whether you're adding or subtracting. So the particular example they gave was an integer. So let's do that. So int count equals 0. And then it seems like if count mod 2 is equal to 0, that tells me it's even, then we're going to add. So int answer is num1 plus num2. Otherwise, we're supposed to do int answer equals num1 minus num2 because it's supposed to alternate back and forth. So now we just need to make sure that that count increments. So there's obviously some kind of a loop going on here that I'm going to have to deal with. I'll do the count plus plus at the bottom here just so that I remember to put that inside of my loop. All right, so the logic of this is that the count is 0, it's even, so I do an add. When count is 1, it's odd, so I'll do a subtract. When count is 2, it's even, so I'll do an add. So presuming that there's something looping here, that will alternate back and forth between them. All right, so otherwise, pop another element from the stack, do an operation on them, and push the result back into the stack. Okay, so to push it back into the stack, we're going to need to do s dot, and do we have a push? We do, so we're going to push back in answer. And of course, that's not going to work because I declared answer inside of my if statement, so let me int answer up here and take out the int on front of these. Okay, who knows if that's right or not, but it's in the ballpark of what they asked me to do. All right, so now it looks like I need a loop that keeps going while the stack is not empty. And that's going to start up here, so we're going to say do, because we are going to do this whole thing regardless. And then do, we're going to indent all of this. And then while, let's do s dot empty. I want it not empty. While the stack is not empty, keep chugging away. All right, so that's most of it. At this point, if I was the person taking the test, I would realize I'm 44 minutes into the test and I've done 2 of the 3 questions, so I think I'm doing okay, but I'm a little freaked out that I haven't started the 3rd question. So I'm not even going to test this. I don't know if it's going to work anyway, but I do know that I wrote most of what they asked me to write. So the detail of whether it works or not, mostly irrelevant. Don't get stuck in the trap of trying to debug this for a half an hour because that's wasting time. You've written most of the code, whether it works or not, just move on. So you can come back to it at the end if you have spare time. So I believe I've written everything. I'm going to do a quick scan here to make sure. In your driver, okay, did I do a driver? Notice that even though you're being asked to pass a specific number to stack math in your driver, your stack math should work for any input. You don't need to worry about integer overflows or underflows. Example, blah, 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 should return these numbers. Okay, so I believe I've written all of this, so I'm just going to move on. We'll come back and test it at the very end. All right, any questions on that one? So in here, you're using a stack, which is one of the data structures. One thing that's weird here is we're asking you to use a stack that we've never shown you how to use before, but you're going to have to figure it out on the fly because we gave you enough code to get started by telling you how to make the stack, and then just look at your IDE to see what options you have in your IDE for the methods. And honestly, they're called exactly what you would think they are: a push and a pop and an empty. They're not really particularly cleverly named. They're actually the same methods you would have in a list or in a linked list or anything else. So not too bad, just a fair amount of coding. All right. So let's take a look at question C. I'm going to start another replit over here and make sure that we're okay for question C. All right, so write an invalid time exception class, which is a subclass of exception. It has an overloaded constructor that takes in a string and passes it to its superclass constructor. All right, so make a custom exception, basically. This one you've actually done literally on a lab, so nothing too difficult here. So I'm going to do a new, it's called invalid time exception.java. No, go away. All right, so we have class invalid time exception. And what we are supposed to do here is we're supposed to be a subclass of exception. So that means it extends exception. It's exceptional. All right, it has an overloaded constructor that takes in a string and passes it. So you remember when you're making a custom exception, you're always going to have a default constructor, invalid time exception, which does nothing. It's just got curly braces. and then you're going to have an overloaded time exception, which takes in a string message, and it simply calls super or base if you're a C# kind of person, to pass that to the parent. That's pretty much how you make an exception every time. So just memorize that if you haven't already memorized it. All right, next up, create an alarm class with the following fields: an integer called timer, a string called message. So alarm.java class alarm. All right, it's supposed to have an integer timer. That probably should be private because they always should. And we should have a string called message, which also should have been private. All right, create a constructor that takes in an integer and a string. It multiplies the integer by 1,000 and assigns it to the timer, and assign the string to the message, and then print alarm created. Okay, so we have a constructor that's doing a couple of little things here. So we have public alarm. What is happening? All right, and then we are going to take in an integer timer and a string message, and I'm supposed to set the timer to 1,000 times whatever they passed me. So t times 1,000, and set the string to the message. So message equals m. And then it says print out alarm created. Great. If you're a C# type of person, when you do your console.write line there, remember you have to do using system at the top, because otherwise it will not work. System has to be included in each class that you use print methods. Create a method called run, which takes no inputs and returns nothing. All right, public void run takes no inputs, returns nothing. All right, the fact that we're calling this run makes me think we're going to do something with a thread here. Have the method sleep for a duration of timer, and then print the message alarm, where message is the alarm's message field. All right, so this looks like it's going to do a thread.sleep, and it's going to sleep for the timer, which is whatever the value is that was passed in earlier. And then it's supposed to print out a message. And the message that we're supposed to get is /n alarm, and then whatever the message is, that's my plus message. Okay, and that's it. Great. And there was supposed to be a colon in there. Small fry, but why not? Did I put my semicolon? I did. Okay, great. Now, the fact that this is a method run, and the fact that I'm about to do stuff with threads, makes me think this is supposed to implement runnable. So I'm going to come back up here and say implements runnable, because it's a thread. If I'm a C# person, I wouldn't do that, but since I'm a Java person, I'm going to do that. The other thing is, I just happen to remember that this is not going to work unless I put this in a try-catch block. If you hit compile, you would have seen an error message about this has to be in a try. The sleep timer always has to be in a try block. And then you can just catch exception. And again, if you hit compile, you would have seen this. Just something to catch. All right, in your driver class, write a static method called verify timer, which accepts an integer and returns nothing. It does the following. All right, so over in main, we are supposed to write a static method called verify timer. So public. All right, static method called verify timer, which accepts an integer and returns nothing. So public static void verify timer, and accepts nothing. Oh, accepts an integer, int x, no idea what that is, and does the following. If the integer is less than 0, throw an invalid time exception with the message timer cannot have a negative value. So if x is less than 0, throw new invalid time exception with the message timer cannot have negative time. Great. Semicolon. Just going to move that over so I can actually see what I'm doing here. Okay, it seems really unhappy with that. Unhandled exception, because I'm throwing this. Ah, right. So I'm Java, and since I'm throwing an exception, I have to say throws invalid time exception. All right, now it's happier. If the integer is greater than 60, say you can't be greater than 60. So else if x is greater than 60, basically the same thing. So I'm just going to grab that and paste it in. And this time it's supposed to be timer cannot be above 60 seconds. I hate you so much. Okay. That window is so in the way. There we go, much better. All right, otherwise the method does nothing. Cool? All right, so that verifies the timer, I guess. In your driver, do the following. Print alarm system. So this is supposed to be alarm system. And then have a menu in a loop with the following options: 1, start alarm; 2, exit. If they type 2, quit the program. All right, so we're going to do int input. We'll set it equal to 0, and then we're going to say do. We're supposed to print out a menu. And the menu is supposed to have 1, start alarm, and 2, exit. All right, we're going to need a scanner because we're going to read in a value from the user. I've lost my mouse. There it is. Scanner, my scan equals new scanner, system.in. All right, if they type in 2, quit the program. So we're going to do this while input is not equal to 2. If they type in 1, prompt the user for an integer for the time in seconds and a string for the message. Great. So we need to read in their answer. So input equals myscan.nextInt. And then we're going to prompt them for stuff if input is 1. So we're asking them for an integer for the time in seconds. And we're going to have to read that in. So that's some kind of an integer. So int num seconds, myscan.nextInt. All right, and then we're supposed to print it, ask them for a message. Enter a message, and that gives me a string. My message, new message equals myscan.next line. All right, you should have an alarm bell in your head if you're a Java student about next ints and next lines getting mixed together. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, remember after every next int, you're going to have to do a next line in order to swallow the carriage return. Otherwise, that's not going to work. If you're C#, you don't have such problems. All right, pass the integer to verify timer. If an exception is thrown, print the message that you got. All right, so I'm supposed to call verify timer, and I'm supposed to pass it the value that they gave me. So verify timer, and I'm passing it num seconds. All right, now it says if a message is, or if an exception was thrown, print the exceptions message. So I'm going to have to try catch this in order to catch a possible exception here. It would make me do that anyway because it throws exceptions. So we're going to try verify timer. So trying to drag and drop things. Sure, that all hangs together. Okay, and then we're going to catch the exceptions from that. So catch invalid times exception. Yes, you could just catch exception, that would be fine. And I'm supposed to specifically print out the message that I got, so e.get message from that exception. If you're a C# student, that will be e.message instead of e.get message. All right. Prompt the user for an integer, pass it to verify timer, print the message. If no exception was thrown, create an alarm with the above information. All right, so at this point, we've assumed it's good. So we are going to create an alarm. My alarm equals new alarm. And I'm supposed to pass that two things, the num seconds and the new message, because that's what the constructor requires. Create a thread for the alarm. So we're going to say thread t1 equals new thread, and I'm passing it my alarm. And then you must catch the following exception types in your driver: invalid time exception if the user enters an invalid time, an input mismatch exception if the user enters a string when asked for an integer. Okay, so in order to catch that, the time where I asked them for integers was up here. So I'm probably going to need to throw all of this in a try catch block as well. So let's do this outside the do. So try, and yes, I need to indent all of this because all of this can cause exceptions if they do something stupid. I'm not going to nest the other one because that's silly. And then here we're going to catch, I'm just going to catch exception, which will get everything. And I'm going to print out print line e.getMessage again. All right, it's not very clear as to what you're supposed to do if they give you something invalid, so we'll go with it. All right, so it looks like the menu keeps running and we have our do loop that's going to do all of that. That looks like that's reasonable. Num seconds can't be resolved to a variable. That's because num seconds is declared inside of an if. So I need to fix that and make that be declared outside of here. So int num seconds. Take away the int on front of that. Now that should be happy. And num seconds down here probably have the same issue. Num new message probably has the same issue as well. So string new message. All right, so that looks like I got rid of probably most of the issues, and now I would start debugging it by actually running it. All right, so let's run this guy. Okay, million mistakes, no surprise there. And now at this point, we're down to debugging, right? So yes, it's worthwhile. I still have, I've been talking for an hour at this point. It's now 11:59, so give or take an hour. You have an hour and 40 minutes, so you have another 40 minutes to go back and debug the remaining things. Now, obviously, I code at whatever speed I code at, and maybe you're a little slower, a little faster. That's great, but you should have some amount of time here at the end to go through and try and find the remaining errors. So I would just go through and start debugging these one-offs and testing the code to make sure it's doing the right thing to try and get those last few points. But I mean, honestly, even if I submitted this test right now with those errors in there, I'm probably going to score in mid 90s on this. Yes, there are typos in there. Obviously, I have stuff where I'm missing semicolons or curly braces are not lining up. I have a try without a catch. I don't actually even know where that is. I guess this try here. So to find the missing, yeah, so, okay, well, clearly that doesn't line up. Remember when you click on something, it'll show you the closing curly brace. So when I'm clicking on this try, it's showing me that the closing curly brace is that while, which is obviously not right. So there's syntax errors in here, but you have to bear in mind it's a human being reading it. They're not matching the curly braces in their head. They have 120 of these to grade and 4 finals to take and get whatever projects they have in their own classes to do. They're not going to notice that you missed a curly brace, generally. Okay, technically, if you're missing the curly brace, yes, it's wrong and you might lose a point, but the chances are they're not going to notice it. So at this point, you're just down to debugging and finding the last few things. Rather than me sitting here and debugging this for the next 5 minutes, I'm going to stop and ask if folks have questions. I'm going to stop the recording at this stage, if I can remember how to do